Hey everybody, welcome to Feeding Our Faith. We're doing our Faith 101 and we're continuing with the Old Testament of the Bible. This is going to be our last episode before Thanksgiving, and then next week we're going to take a break and then we'll pick up after that. So I'm going to hand it off to Pastor Diane.
That's good. Thanks, Tony. So as you recall, last week we were talking about we went through Moses and we went through the judges a little bit, and we left over where Joshua, who was Moses' assistant, was taking over. So we're coming to the point where Joshua's death sort of changed the way things were in Jewish life, right? Because, well, first of all, before he died, the Israelites were going into the promised land. And they had taken over like 90% of the land. So they divided it amongst the tribes, and then they disbanded the army. So they were in essence back, each person going back to their own tribe. So what this meant is the centered idea of the Jewish people being one was now kind of broken apart, and they were again tribes. And during that time, the judges were in a situation where there was all kinds of warfare going on. People, remember we talked last week about the enemies filtering back in, and they were basically fighting them time and time and time again. So one of the judges was Samuel. And Samuel's mother was pretty interesting story. So I'm going to take us to Samuel 1 through 17. And Samuel is, got it for me. And then somebody look up, we're going to go then 20 to 22. So Samuel 1 through 17.
After Deuteronomy.
Yep, 327.
First or second Samuel?
First.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep. Where Samuel was born. Melanie, guess what? I'm going to let you read this. You know why, don't you?
I bet there's lots of names in there.
Lots of names.
Okay. There was a certain
We're talking
man.
first about Samuel's birth.
Okay. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had two wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my greatest anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him.
All right, so there you go.
That was a lot of names.
That was a lot of names. But obviously Hannah was the one that her husband loved the most. And she, guess what? As you've seen how many times in the story of the Old Testament, she couldn't bear children, or she wasn't bearing children. And that was a disgrace to her and her husband, actually. So Hannah prayed to God saying, basically, if you give me a child, I will devote him to you, right? So now I'm going to go to 20 to 22. And I can read that. Let me see, let me find it. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. When the man Elkanah went up with his family to offer annual sacrifice to fulfill the vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. So Hannah's idea to devote Samuel to the Lord was to take him and drop him off and make him basically Eli's servant. Now, remember we talked about how the priests, they went on in according to the hereditary, their heredity. Well, Eli was a priest, but his two sons were definitely not so good. Their names were Hophni and Phinehas, and they served in the sanctuary at Shiloh, but they took some of the portions of the sacrifice for themselves, and then they slept with the sanctuary's women. So God wasn't happy. But Eli didn't crack down on them. He just let them be. So honestly, and they were the ones that took the Ark of the Covenant to war against the Philistines. The idea was if you had the Ark of the Covenant with you, you would be blessed in battle. Not so much these guys. They were both killed. And then Eli, when he heard that news, he fell from his seat and broke his neck and he died. So there you go, how Samuel basically came into all of this. Samuel is the last of the Israelites' judges and also their first prophet. And he was a counselor to Saul and then David, right? But Samuel sort of fell in the same deal as Eli did. He had two sons, Joel and Abijah, I would say. And they didn't walk in the ways of the Lord. And they took bribes and they perverted justice. And again, God warned Samuel, not the way to do it. However, they didn't listen and not too good things happened to them. So through all of this then, and through the wars, the Israelites came to God and to Samuel, and they said, judges are fine. We're glad to hear from you. But what we really need is someone who's battle experienced that can conquer and solve all of these wars that we're on, right? So I'm going to take you to 1 Samuel 8, 19 and 20. It's a short one, but you'll see where we're going.
Samuel 8, 19 and 20.
Okay. The people paid no attention to Samuel, but said, no, we want a king so that we will be like other nations, with our own king to rule us and to lead us out to war and to fight our battles.
So see, God warned the people, and he even said specifically what would happen. These guys will take advantage of you and you will not be happy. There'll be a king, but no. But they didn't want anything to do with that. So God acquiesced and said, okay, Samuel, go and anoint Saul as king. And I'll just quickly take you. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and he poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance? Right? So there was Saul as king. Now Saul started out pretty good because he conquered a lot of things. He actually reigned for 27 or so years. But then remember, and we talked about it when we looked at the book of Genesis, I believe. Remember the women, David killed Goliath, and the women were saying that Saul killed hundreds, but David killed thousands. So then Saul got jealous of David. Remember that? So that's basically what happened. So Saul was trying to kill David, running around trying to kill. But the thing of it is, Saul also had a son, Jonathan, and Jonathan and David were really, really good friends. We're told that Saul was tall, dark, and handsome, every woman's dream, right? But he was a spoiled rich kid in essence. So, but he made one fatal mistake. Samuel 1:15, that's where we're going next. Are we going too fast or are you still following me?
We're okay.
We're okay. All right, Samuel 15. We're going to look at 3 and then we're going to look at 9 and 10. This is God speaking to Saul. You want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Okay. God said, now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Do not put to death men and women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. That was pretty clear what happened, right? So now we're going to go to verse 9. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and lambs. Everything was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. And the word
The way my Bible read, it's Samuel telling this to Saul, not God.
well, okay, God through Samuel.
Okay.
Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, and he said he was grieved at what Saul has done because he's turned away from him and not carried out his instructions. So we all know how God feels when people don't do what God tells them to do. He was not happy. So Samuel anointed David, right? But it wasn't right away that David was king. As a matter of fact, it took some years before David became king. And in the meantime, David went between going to battle to defeat people that Saul wanted to defeat and serving as Saul's companion. You remember when Saul was making himself a little crazy over things, David would go and play his harp that would soothe him, right? So it turns out that David was the second king of the Israelites. What happened? David came close to killing Saul a couple of times, but each time he acquiesced and he decided not to kill him. Even though Saul was trying to kill David, he just couldn't do it. He had too much love for him. But Saul, turns out, his whole troop was killed in battle, including his sons, right? And you know what Saul did? He couldn't take losing the battle. So he went to one of his servants and said, get my spear, my sword, and run me through. Brave man, wasn't he? So that's what happened. Saul and all three of his sons were killed. So now we have David. David struggled a little bit against some of the enemies of Saul, right? And David was the one who conquered the Jebusite town of Jerusalem. So, do we know what Jerusalem actually was, guys? It was the capital.
The capital. Yeah, I just said that with my mute on.
Yeah, it was the capital. So there we go. David and all of his crew were in the capital. Remember the story of David and Bathsheba?
Hmm?
So what was that story?
David saw Bathsheba bathing and he lusted after her and had her husband killed so he could be with her.
Yep. And again, God was not happy. So what did God do?
I don't remember.
The boy died.
Oh, that's right.
And then David went, of course, to God, and that's where he said, my sin is ever before me. Remember?
Hmm.
Okay. Is this, you're following all of this? It's not really all that complicated. Samuel was born. His mother took him to Eli. Eli's sons were corrupt, right? So then Saul got king. The people wanted a king, so they got Saul. Saul started out okay, then he became corrupt, and he did what God didn't want him to do. So now we enter David, who David was pretty happy, and God was pretty happy with David. Remember, God described David as a man after his own heart, right? So there was David, king of Israel, altogether. Because what happened is he was king over part of the tribes, and then later he became, or that might be Samuel or Solomon I'm thinking about. But so then David died. And who was his son? Let me give you a hint. Split the baby in half. Solomon.
I was having a momentary brain fart.
Mhm. Now, this was somewhere around 870 BCE, almost 1,000 years before Christ was born. Do you remember where the Jews were celebrating God's presence up until now? Remember in the tent. Remember how God told them how to build the tabernacle tent?
Oh, yeah.
But because of some of the things that David had done, I would expect, God says, you're not the one, David, to build my house. Solomon will be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take you to 1 Kings chapter 3. And that comes right after we got this 2 Samuel.
Which verses?
4 through 15.
What chapter?
3,
Okay,
verses 4 through 15. And this is about Solomon.
Have it here.
Go ahead.
The most important of these places of worship was at Gilbin or Gibeon.
Gibeon.
So the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." Solomon replied, "You showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you. And now you have continued to show this great and faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And I am here amidst of your chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" Should I continue?
Okay. Solomon awoke, and it had been a dream, and returned to Jerusalem. So Solomon got his wisdom and much more, right? Lord said, was pleased, and he said, "Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth, for the death of your enemies, but for discernment, I will give you what you ask, and I will give you a wise and discerning heart." Well, how did Solomon become wise? He asked to become wise. But I'm going to move you now. Just stick with me, because I'm going to read 10:27. Just one single. Well, I'll read for 23. King Solomon was greater in riches than all other kings on earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift: articles of gold and silver, robes, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kue. The royal merchants purchased them from Kue. They imported the chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. This guy had a lot of riches. But what else did Solomon have a lot of?
and wisdom.
Wisdom.
Yep. Let's go to chapter 13, chapter 11. Tony, you might want to read this, because I don't know, maybe just make you happy being a guy. Just teasing.
11, which verse?
Start at 1.
Okay, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides the Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyways. He had 700 wives, of royal birth, and 300 concubines. In fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to the worship of other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped Azeroth, Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Sheshmosh or Chemosh, the detestable god of the Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant and disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive."
See, that's important. He didn't do it while Solomon was still alive.
I
Go
will
ahead,
take
Tom.
I will take the kingdom away from your son. And even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe. And for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city.
Seems to be a theme you get here, huh, guys? You start out good,
It
Then
turns
come
sour.
then we pull away from God. Now, here's the thing, and you have to picture this. And clearly I wasn't there, but I'm just imagining. 700 wives, 300 concubines. How many children do you suppose Solomon had?
More than the sand in the ocean.
I'll bet he didn't know his wife's names either.
No, I bet not. And forget about remembering anniversaries and birthdays.
That's right.
Yeah, there'd be plenty of cake.
Happy anniversaries every day.
But the thing of it was, think about this. Say you have 300 brothers and sisters. Y'all gonna know them all by name?
Nope.
No.
What if some of them were from another country and you didn't even speak their language?
That's true.
Would you consider that they were a tightly knit family? No,
No.
absolutely not. So basically, there were two of them. Let me see. Jeroboam would become the first king of Israel, and he began to rebel against Solomon, right? So there you go. Now they had two sons, particularly. Rehoboam ruled the southern kingdom of Judah, right? And Solomon's advisor, Jeroboam, ruled the northern kingdom. So you had a united Israel. Now you had two groups that were not belonging to each other. So the nation was split in two, into the northern and the southern. Now, Melanie, get your Googling out and find out what the southern kingdom was and what was its, this was always kind of interesting to me. What was its capital?
The Southern Kingdom of Solomon.
Well, I don't know how you're going to, Southern Kingdom of Judah is what it was, but
Okay. Well, it might come up this way. If not, I'll switch it.
okay.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. After the death of Solomon, the country was divided into two independent kingdoms. The southern region came to be called Judah, which consisted of the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, and Jerusalem was the capital.
So there were two tribes in the southern kingdom.
Yep.
Yep.
Benjamin and Judah.
Okay. And what about the Northern Kingdom? Does it tell you what the capital of Judah was?
Jerusalem.
Yeah. See, you usually, okay, now Google the Northern Kingdom and see what the Northern Kingdom was.
Oh my.
This is the weird thing.
The Northern Kingdom consisted of 10 of the tribes, excluding Judah and Benjamin.
Yep,
It lasted for about 210 years until it was destroyed by Assyria in 722 BC. Its capital was Samaria. Not
So the
Sumeria, Samaria.
That's right. The Southern Kingdom was Judah, and its capital was Jerusalem, right?
Mhm.
The Northern Kingdom was Israel. I don't know if you read it, but nonetheless it was.
The
And
Northern Kingdom? Yeah, it didn't say.
And it had as its capital as
Samaria.
Samaria. So when we think of the Jewish nation, where's its capital now?
Jerusalem.
But when they were two separate nations, right? The first one was Judah, and that's where Jerusalem was. The northern one, actually a little higher, right, was Israel, and its capital was Samaria. So interesting, Melanie, and we probably will go a little further than what I had originally thought today, because that's okay. But what happened to the northern tribes?
It was defeated by Assyria.
Okay, take it a little step further. It was defeated by
Okay.
Assyria, but what happened to the people?
I'll tell you here in a minute. Northern tribes of... Okay. They split along territorial and political lines. With Judah and Benjamin in the south, loyal to the Davidic house, and the rest of the tribes in the north ruled by a succession of monarchies.
Mhm.
Now let's see if I can find something else. Israel became the northern kingdom and Judah became the southern kingdom. Solomon's descendants would continue to rule the southern kingdom of Judah. The people of Judah would become known as the Jews. Judah kept the capital city of Jerusalem, while Israel created the capital city of Samaria.
Mhm.
And the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians, and the population deported as per Assyrian military policy. So they were deported out of their land. And Judah was destroyed by the Babylonians in 598 to 582 BCE.
That's right. So the northern kingdom was taken off into exile,
Yes.
right? And so, you know, the northern kingdom that was Israel ultimately left. Nothing happened to them. They went out into diaspora. They married intermarried people. They did not, we were out of the picture.
Mhm.
So what you normally think then as the tribes of Israel were down to two, Benjamin and Judah. And their city or their county was, or their capital was Jerusalem,
Mhm.
right? Now, Google what happened to the southern kingdom.
Okay. Well, they became known as Jews.
Yep, they were the Jews. 2 tribes only. Other 10 tribes dissipated,
Yep.
walked out
Those
of
two
history.
became Jews.
Yep.
Is that all you wanted to know about that?
Well, no, I don't only want to know what happened that they became Jews. I know that, but what happened later?
Oh, okay. Well, let me see here. What about the southern kingdom?
Yep.
All right, let's see. After the death of King Solomon, we already did that. They retained the name Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah, so named after the tribe Judah that dominated the kingdom. The last war they engaged in destroyed Israel, but left Judah intact.
That's what I said.
Yeah. The southern kingdom of Judah thrived until 587 to 586 BC, when it was overrun by the Babylonians, who carried off many of the inhabitants into exile. So they eventually got.
They went into exile. And when typically what you're hearing most about when the Jews being in exile, that is the Babylonian exile,
Okay.
right? Which lasted 70 years. Then what happened is the Persians came in and they took over the Babylonians, right? And then you
Mhm.
have Cyrus. Cyrus was the leader of the Persians. So he said to the Jews, okay, you can go home, but you're in essence going to be a vassal state. You're going to pay tribute to me and you're going to do all of these things. So you're sort of mine. Curious the way this all happened.
Mhm.
But that basically is the history of what we are going to call the Israelite nation. We've been through a lot in the last, how long we've been doing? Six weeks at least?
Mhm.
Okay. So the Israelites came home, right? And ultimately they ended up building the temple again and starting. This is, remember one time we talked about how some of them had intermarried, so that when they came home, the temple, they were trying to build it and it wouldn't build and it wouldn't build and they wouldn't build. And they said, well, God is against us. Why? Well, because we intermarried. So let's all just divorce those intermarried wives and we will then be pure and God will be happy with us.
Mhm.
Okay. There's where I wanted to end, because we got further than I wanted to. There's where I wanted to end our history of Israel. I think when we come back, we'll talk about some things so that we can connect them. Couple of things you guys wanted to talk about was atonement, right? How that all happens. And to do that, we'll sort of connect that with the Jewish system of sacrifices, how that all works. You can go into Leviticus and see all of those laws. And we'll look at what the Old Testament said about Christ. Because remember when we say Jesus filled the law and the prophets,
Mhm.
that means he fulfilled all that was spoken about of him in the Old Testament. So we'll sort of walk through those of what the Old Testament does. Have we kicked around the sin and the fall enough? Or are you guys wanting to look at that a little more? Because that was one that you sort of thought at the beginning you wanted to look at.
I think we're good.
I'm good with that. I'm good with what we had already done there.
Okay, because what happens ultimately there is we're discussing, is there such a thing as original sin? Because Adam and Eve sinned, does Adam seminally pass that corrupted world and corrupted nature onto all of humanity? Is that why we as people of God sin so readily? Because it's part of our nature. I never did buy that as an idea. I more think like, and I teased, remember from in a couple of different places, I said, I can just see Adam and Eve after God kicked them out of the garden, and Adam is saying to Eve, what did you give me that apple for? And he said, well, you're allowed to eat it. So one of the popular ideas, and I'll just talk about sin and fall to round that out, is that they were spiritually uninformed. Remember, they were just told, do this,
Mhm.
right? So if they were spiritually uninformed, that meant they were immature in their faith, in their belief, and in their walk with God. Part of another theory is that you and I are not corrupt, but that we are only spiritually immature. That's a wider explanation, I don't know if it's the right one. To me, there is always something, I don't want to call it sinister, but something sort of embedded, whether it was learned from Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, because right after Adam and Eve, what happened? Cain killed Abel. Didn't even take one generation for them to start murdering each other. I don't know where, and of course that was jealousy, right? Because God accepted Abel's sacrifice more than he did Cain's. So those ideas are the sin and the fall. Are you guys, Tony says, you guys say you're happy enough with them. Are you good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll look then at the systems of sacrifice, the types of laws, what the Old Testament said about God. And then we will look at justification and adoption and atonement as it fits into sacrifice. That is our current plan. And those will be the subjects. I'm assuming it might take more than a week. I don't know. You guys may feel that these things are complicated enough that we should kick them around. So you remember I said we're going to do a little homework.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's the thing. Basically do some work to find out how sacrifice worked in the Jewish culture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then look at Christ and his sacrifice. See how they may be similar. And we'll discuss what we really think about. Did it actually work that way? Or did it work another way?
What were your two questions? How did sacrifice work in the Jewish culture?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one?
Then look at Christ, the way Christ sacrificed his life. What happened to him, not just what he said, but what was the context, what happened to him.
Okay.
And then see the similarities and the differences between the two. Now, I'm not looking for you to do days of study. You know,
Good, you weren't going to.
but
Not days, we're past that.
that's my job, right, Rox?
Yep.
It's right.
But the thing of it is, there are some things here that you have to decide for yourself. There ultimately are some things you have to decide for yourself. Did Christ came to earth, God incarnate? We're going to celebrate Advent. But did he come to earth specifically to die? Did he die as a sacrifice? What happened there and how did it happen? I happen myself to, you always have to say, if God required Jesus, his son, to be killed, does that leave you a version of a bloodthirsty God?
But just stop and think if somebody asked you today to sacrifice your child,
Yeah. Holy cow.
you'd be mortified.
Well, you would be mortified, but the thing of it is, we are not God. When God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, Christ's sacrifice, God knew what God was doing. And I've said a few times to myself, just for argument's sake, if I thought my life would give eternal life to the rest of the world, and if you thought it would, even your son's life, would you sacrifice it? Not looking for an answer now, just something for you all to think about.
Mhm.
Phrase your question again.
If you found out that your life or the life of your son, if they were sacrificed the way Christ was, And in that sacrifice, you would save people for all eternity so that people can now live for all eternity. Would you make that sacrifice?
Tough one.
Yeah, tough one. Okay, so system of sacrifice and Christ's atonement. Subjects for the first week we're going to go in. I'll be studied up on the different types of laws, although they are just sort of, so you just know all of the, have a taste for all of the things the Jews were required to do.
It was
Right?
very elaborate.
But this is what connects, and this is our beginning of not knowing about the history, but actually thinking about these things theologically. Right? And there are lots of things. Could Christ be fully human and fully divine? If so, why did he pray to God? You know, and I'm not giving you the answer now, or I'm not questioning you, telling you what I question. I'm saying there's a lot of things you really have to think about if you're going to be mature in your faith.
I think there's a lot of questions that you'll never have your answers to satisfy you.
Mhm. Some things we're just never going to know.
It's too complex.
Well, you know, God is been translated in scripture to how our human brain reads and knows and understands. Not necessarily what, I mean, God is so much more than we can ever think about or imagine. And I think you've heard it said from the Bible or from the pulpit many times, God's ways are not our ways. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't delve into understanding him. All right.
Right.
And then ultimately, you guys felt you were fairly solid on the Gospels, but you wanted to know more about like James, not you know, the book of James and 1st and 2nd John and stuff like that.
Titus.
You wanted to know more about the books that you hadn't ever dealt with.
Yeah. Jude.
Jude. All right. Well, that's what I have for tonight. Hopefully you got the idea, because you know Solomon, you know David, you've heard about him over and over, but now you know a little bit more what happened to the Jews, you know, after Moses. Does this help you, or did this kind of, because we went at a pretty fast pace today? You guys are solid. Yes?
Mhm.
Okie dokie.
Sarai.
All right.
Interesting stuff.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be taking a break next week, and then we'll get right back to it. And I hope you're able to come this weekend. We have a really special service coming up where we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving in a particular way. And I hope you can tune in or come and enjoy it in person. And that's on Sundays at 10:30. So thank you very much. And if I don't see you, have a happy Thanksgiving.